Good evening, everyone. I'm so happy to see you all here to share this next hour where we have a conversation about our practices as artists. And this is my first time moderating, so bear with me. Yeah. And thank you. I hope you have all seen the exhibits. Have you seen Hannah's show in Sding K'awXangs? Yes. Awesome. That's great. I'm so happy that that's opportunity for Montreal to really start to learn about Indigenous people in a truthful manner. And the McCord's doing an excellent job. So thank you to the McCord and the wonderful staff, and to everyone who's organized this event. Thank you. So I'm just going to get into it. We have about 5 different questions we're going to kind of go through with the artists, and I'll ask the questions, and we'll just kind of go down the line, or this way, or maybe we'll come that way for a different question, or we'll figure it out as we go along. So this is the first question we have. In what ways is your work influenced by traditional practices? In what ways does it respond to contemporary art practices, and how do these two intersect? So maybe we'll go to Hannah.
I knew I shouldn't have sat here. I think this is kind of traditional.
Or classical. Let's say classical. Traditional's kind of a bum word because it kind of boxes everything in and kind of keeps it there. So I think maybe let's say like classical works.
Well, I think that's it. I think I'm sort of answering your question with a question. It's just the idea of traditional, and we've talked about this a little bit, is, how that word's used, particularly when talking about Indigenous arts, and what are the expectations that brings with it. So I think that's something that, to me, I really feel, and I think is often felt by Indigenous artists, the idea of traditional, that idea of boxing in as like a category, that as a contemporary Indigenous artist, we try or I feel like it has certain expectations as to what it is. So traditional being in the past, I don't think is a word that I associate with what I do, really. I think that my work deals a lot with process, and in that it's repetition, the making of the object from sort of beginning to end. Maybe this idea that's installation as well, but process plays a big part in it. It's almost as much as the finished object itself, the process of making it. And I think that relates to other classical methods of making, of basket making, of beadworking, the sort of idea that it's got a rhythm to it, and that it comes out of something that repeats itself over time, in a specific way. So in that way, I think of traditional in my work. I think also it's about drawing on maybe the teachings and trying to interpret them in a way that makes them alive in our society today. So things like Sky Woman and Sky World with the creation teaching, and installations that kind of move in the air from breezes. It's talking about things being alive and moving and changing, and not static or stuck in the past.
Beautiful. I love that. Ariane, how do you feel that your work is influenced by our classical or traditional practices? And how do you feel that it's also contemporary, and how does that intersect in your work?
I feel like it's different from each perspective. As in Spruce Roots, I wouldn't necessarily say traditional or classical, because for me it would be more ancestral learning, because it goes as far back, farther than like Isabella Edenshaw and like throughout our family. And with that, I feel like the technology of it and the inventive ways of like harvesting and processing roots and how things were made, they weren't made just to sit on display in a gallery or wherever. There were different baskets and mats and hats, and everything had its own name and purpose. And even now, if you look in collections, they're strong and sturdy enough, but finely woven that could be on display in a museum, but you could also still pick it up and use it like it's been used forever. And learning, I would focus more on the ancestral ways of that type of weaving in comparison to contemporary pieces, just for myself, so I like it to be more ancestrally based. But in Raven's Tale, when I started weaving that about 10 years ago, I was 19 and I couldn't really afford anything because I was a 19-year-old kid learning how to weave an older textile style. And when I first started getting commissions, people would ask for different designs, but I couldn't afford the books that had the designs in it. So I would look at what other people were making, and then I would come up with my own designs influenced with those classical designs. So technically, they would be like a contemporary interpretation of classical designs. So I guess that way it would be more contemporary based, but still traditional. So it's different either way. And learning both twine basketry weaving and textile weaving can influence each other with like designs, because then I could use basketry designs in textile and textile designs in basketry from learning both.
John, how do you feel that your work is influenced by traditional practices, and in what ways does it respond to contemporary art practices, and how do they intersect?
Well, my art is Haida art, so it is strongly rooted in Haida culture, and it is made up of the classical elements that are found in Haida art, the ovoid, the U shape, the S shape. So in that way, it's strongly rooted in our culture. And traditional is a term that I tend to avoid, simply because our art form was about documenting history and the artist's personal history and what they witnessed in argillite and whatever work that they produced. Like during the time of contact, they were carving Europeans in their sailor suits and ship's rigging and coaches and horses. So they were documenting what they were witnessing. And Europeans didn't come over to get a portrait of themselves in argillite, so they wanted to start collecting the more classical pieces. So, when you'd ask for something, you'd say, oh, I want, the traditional work. So at that point, the art form became a market-based commodity kind of a thing. So that's where I feel like the term traditional came from. And so I like to use the term more classical Haida art. And following on that timeline of the Haidas capturing what they were seeing at the time, I kind of continued that avenue further within my work and started documenting my own history and how I move through the world and where it brings me. So, even the piece projected there, I moved to Montreal to study fine art and do a master's in fine arts. But at the same time, I'm also so far away from home, Haida. So thinking about that and how to actually capture that idea of the positive and negative of Montreal. I'm getting an education, but I'm also so far away from home, missing birthdays, cultural events, and stuff like that. And then, So you start thinking about a city and how do you portray a positive, negative of a city. You know, a lot of people think, you know, the daytime, they are free to move around, and at night, sometimes people are often scared of being out in the city at night. So that's why both the day and the night are present in that piece. And I wanted it to be a really fine balance for which image is dominating, because it is such a fine balance of for myself, which was the positive and negative of the city. So yeah, so my work is just, I feel like it's strongly classical Haida art at its, what its original intention was for documenting history. And the history I know the best is my own, and that's where all the work in the exhibition comes from, that perspective, is documenting me in this world.
That's beautiful. I like this heavy pushback on the word traditional, because it is really a tough word to navigate, I think, as Indigenous people, because everyone's saying that's not traditional. Even, you know, as a tattoo artist, people are like, oh, so what do you use? What's the material? Do you collect the... And I'm like, no, I actually go to the tattoo shop because everything's, you know, clean, and, you know, I got to protect myself and my clients. So I think I really enjoy this heavy pushback on that word, and I think that's like a great conversation to have with people who are represented in this place, and a great footnote for the McCord to think about moving forward with the Indigenous, all these beautiful Indigenous shows that they're bringing forward. And I saw even in the McCord advertisements, they're like, discover the Indigenous, you know, and that's so important, I think, for Montreal, and so important for the McCord to realize when they are dealing with our wonderful First Peoples of this place. So thank you. So we're going to move into the next question, and this is kind of related to your time in Montreal, and so we're kind of going into this conversation. And where do you live, either in direct connection with your community or disconnected from your community, influence your artist practice? And the reason we came up with this question is because we look at the work of, say, Bill Reid. He lived in Montreal for, I think, 10 years, like a pretty close. And he created some of his greatest work. So how does either living in your community or away from your community affect your artistic practice? John.
Well, when I lived here and studied here, I felt the disconnect from my community and my culture quite strongly, and it showed up in my work quite a bit with reflections of buildings and glass, and really trying to figure out how I fit into this culture in Montreal, and what my role would be here, and how to actually still maintain my own culture, and what it looks like for them to blend together. And that was a topic I actually tackled in one of my prints called Self-Portrait Montreal. And so, being disconnected from my culture and community played a huge role in all of that, but it was also necessary to gain my master's in fine arts. So, it was an amazing experience. So it was really benefited my art practice and allowed me to really kind of deconstruct it and then build it back up to what I felt it should be, while maintaining the classical elements and the Haida culture.
Ariane, you've been away from home for a while and continue your work.
Yeah, so I grew up in Old Masset all the way up until about 8 months ago. Then I moved to Ottawa for an internship, But even though I did grow up in the village, it's not necessarily like accessible for what I wanted to learn. So when I was 14, I would go and spend whole summers with my Aunt Isabel Rourke, and she lives on Hornby Island, which is 2 small islands away of Vancouver Island. So even then, even though I grew up in my village, I still had to leave to learn something that comes from our village. And then aside from going to spend whole summers with her practicing prep and weaving baskets, when I was 19, I had to start going to study collections in museums because a lot of those works we don't just have in somebody's house at home. And to actually get time to study like which way the turns were, how the designs were created, I would have to go do that. So I've been working on that for the last like probably 10 years, studying here and there. And then with the internship, I got to work with like all different parts of the museum, so it wasn't necessarily just research based, but when I did have time to study their collection, I was quite happy. And there was one basket in particular that was woven by Isabella Edenshaw, and it's oval shaped, but it's also on display, so it's behind glass, so I can't really just pick it up and look at it. So I went and visited it almost every day for a while, trying to figure out how the start was because it's not circular. So that's why there's like one basket in the exhibit that's kind of odd shape, but it's just because I really wanted to learn that technique so that I could remember it. So then when I go back to Haida, I have more understanding of different techniques and designs and uses of our basketry. So.
I'm curious, did Bill Reed live in Haida?
No, he came home for summers. He came home he came home a lot, but he was always in Vancouver. He came home in 1979, I think, for like 6 months. And then again, he came home in 1985 for Expo 86.
It wasn't a test, it's okay.
Yeah, no, but Bill was very much a Vancouver man. But he did produce some of his greatest works in Montreal, and so that being away maybe makes you a bit more reflective, or not being there, and maybe changes your work a bit. Maybe it doesn't. I don't know.
I was just curious because I don't know. I didn't know that he was in Montreal, and I don't know what works he produced, but now I want to go find out.
He did the Milky Way. Google it. It's incredible.
I will.
Incredible. It's one
cool.
of his greatest. This is one of his greatest masterpieces. And,
okay.
I'll just explain the Milky Way. It's I think it's got like 300 so diamonds on it, and it has a necklace, a base of the necklace. It took him 10 years to finish, and he wanted to do the Milky Way, and he called it a Haida piece, but it's not visibly Haida, but it's one of his greatest pieces. And he says it's Haida because it's connected throughout. So all of the diamonds are set on kind of this. I wish I had a picture. I should have been more. Sorry, I never thought about it. But it's one of the most incredible pieces. I know his wife wore it in Expo 86, and the royal family was like, "Where did you get that?" So I guess this question evolved from that kind of seeing John's work of Montreal, which I think is very striking. And knowing all of us have kind of been away in some way or another from, away from our home communities. Yeah.
Well, that's partly why I was interested, because I know that, or I was pretty sure that you guys were all from Haida or close to the communities, but I didn't grow up in my community at all, or technically my grandfather's community. I'm a member of Tyndonega, but I never grew up there. I have a second cousin who lives in Belleville, and I go and visit her sometimes, try and get to the powwow, but I didn't grow up there. So I grew up actually on the East Coast, other end, quite far away from family and community in that sense. But ever since I left, had been coming to sort of figure out what is this Mohawk part of me, what does it mean, and if I'm going to claim this, I need to understand what it is and make it real. So it's been something I've been doing mainly through my arts and then by extension just in my life, but as I guess in an urban way, connecting and learning where I can. Connecting with different communities to learn and to listen and find out more, and making community while I'm at it. So when I've lived here since 2001, I came for the MFA program at Concordia also, and just felt so excited to be on Ka'ingehaga territory and to know the word Ka'ingehaga and to be able to say it, So that to me was terrific, because before I was in Toronto, which is mainly Anishinaabe territory, Six Nations isn't too far, but yeah, so I've really felt very privileged to be here and learning more and building community while I'm here. But I think that's it too. I also think of the Indigenous arts community as a real community here, and I'm really happy to see some of my friends from that community here tonight. But I mean, you're kind of part of it too. We connect through Facebook, but I knew you, I met you through the Indigenous arts community. I'm wearing earrings by a former student who actually sells them in the McCord boutique, if you want to check them out. Cedar Eve Peters, she's great. She was a student of mine, and she's an artist as well. And I think Peter Moran, Talton artist, friend who's now teaching in Toronto, we did an exhibition here and had these shirts happen. And part of the shirts is about our stars. We wanted to talk about the stars. I was interested with the Milky Way, but we talk about our stars because there are ancestor artists, there are teacher artists that have now moved on, and at the same time there are rock stars, and we want to know about them. So I have Annie Putugu on my T-shirt, and we had these T-shirts up on the ceiling arranged as the stars as part of the exhibition, and then also kind of perform the stars. We had karaoke to sing to the stars. So anyway, it was a lot of fun. But it's just to say, community is changing and living and alive, very alive, and I think we need to make it be a part of us where we can, where we go, and bring it with us, like our ancestors are always with us.
Beautiful. Yeah, I think that there is something to say when you have to leave your community to learn what we need to learn. For Ariane to have to travel away to learn about our own self is so big, and so not everyone gets to either be in their community or live in the community or even leave the community sometimes. So I think it's beautiful. So thank you guys for sharing on this. So we're going to get into the next question. What is it like to exhibit your work to a predominantly non-Indigenous culture, and does it change how you do your work as artists? And we'll start with Ariane.
Of course, it's this question.
Yeah.
For myself, I'm not really too particular or concerned over who is the viewing public for my works or where they're exhibited, because even starting at my age and having, I know a lot of people like to say my name, like, how do they say it, John, with the French? Ariane? I can't say it. And growing up on the West Coast, I've always just said Ariane, and I didn't know if it was a French name or where it came from. I had so many nicknames and whatever, and I don't have a Haida last name as well. So when I first started exhibiting works, even on Haida, they'd say, oh, why do we have non-Haida people weaving? Because they'd read that name, and I'm like, oh, great. And they're like, oh, do you want to meet the artist? And they're like, but she's so young, and she's Haida. And it was so, either way, if people are happy to see it, then I'm happy. And even it may be a shock if I come in and they'll be like, oh, we're just going to take the artist. And I'm like, but I'm an artist. So either way, it's just if somebody's happy to see it, then I'm happy.
Okay, showing work to primarily non-Indigenous audiences, and does it change how we do our work?
Yes.
Okay, no.
No.
I think I'm being a little facetious, but I don't know any artist who's going to say that they changed their work for how someone else is going to see it. I don't even know an artist that would say that they make something expecting someone to get something particular out of it necessarily. I think you make what you need to make, right? That's what comes out of you. For my work in particular, I think that someone Indigenous probably often will get a different maybe level of meaning. I'm going to quote a friend of mine who's an artist, and Carla Hemlock is a fantastic textile artist who's from Kwiaahwah, and she says this thing where she does quilts, these textile quilts, and she says this thing where someone who's not Indigenous will look at it and be like, oh, it's a quilt with a turtle. Nice. And then someone who is Indigenous will be like, it's a turtle. And then someone who's Kwiaahwah will just go even deeper with the turtles. So that can be debated. But it's just to say, like, I think people can understand different levels in what you do, in what I do, and that's okay. That's okay. If someone sees it and wants to go further, they'll kind of read my artist statement or talk to me or look it out and look a little bit more to see what else there is. But the worst thing that I ever had written about my work was in a book, and it said, what is this show? You could buy these things at IKEA. It was talking about my suspended clouds. So that was like, oh, but it was a while ago. I got over it.
Mr. Bennett.
I don't create work for a specific audience. I create work that I feel like is meaningful to myself, and I put a lot of meaning into my work, and whether that comes across to the viewer or not isn't important to me, as long as it holds meaning for the viewer and that they can glean something or even relate to it or appreciate it. And if you can't, then I guess I failed. But I like your quote of you make something for yourself. And I feel like there's a lot of myself in a lot of my prints, and Kwiaahwah can actually glean a lot of what I was feeling when I was creating this work. It was quite amazing to listen to her talk about my work, because that was pretty much exactly what I was feeling. We did a show previous to this one called The Tale of Two Artists in Vancouver, and we actually discussed my work quite a bit. So it makes me happy knowing that it is possible for somebody to like I said, glean the knowledge of exactly how I was feeling when I produced this work. So
I know curating, for me, when I curated Haida now, it's a monster show. It's about 4 times the size of Sding K'awXangs. I really had to push and make room with my museum colleagues, because I was yet again a guest curator, to make room so that we could present a story on a deeper level. So I know for me, like, I definitely as a curator have to adjust and also struggle with the museum confines when they're like, you have 50 words, and I'm like, not today. I need 500 words, you know. But it's definitely, I know, curatorially sometimes a struggle for me to make sure that not only are the Haida happy, which is very important because I would have hell to pay, you know, if they weren't, but to ensure that I'm not getting too deep for the audience too, you know. So it's for me, I know it's definitely I have to shift and transform quite a bit to meet both demands, both to my community and to the greater community, to make sure that we all gain meaning for it. And so thank you for answering this question so honestly, and all sort of facetious behavior is welcome, so thank you. So we only have 2 questions left. And this is a great one. In what ways would you recommend that museums increase their capacity for showcasing Indigenous cultures respectfully? Like, so what could you say to a museum to kind of, you know, make sure that they're doing a good job, like words of advice to the museum realm to showcase our art? Hannah.
I think it's important to have Indigenous staff and have it be more than one employee. When it's one person, it's like the burden of being the Indigenous knowledge keeper for all Indigenous people and all Indigenous cultures. It's hard, you know. So, you know, we all know, you know. Yeah. So I think that's a big one. That's a big one. And then just in all, it's also in all aspects of the museum. There's so many things that make up what a museum is. It's education programming, it's curation, it's administrative, it's pricing, it's whatever, you know, there's so many things. So that can be many people, basically. I think that would be sort of the number one thing I'd say for increasing capacity for Indigenous work in a museum.
John? We're almost done.
Well, all the dealings that I've had with museums have been quite pleasant. They're open and willing to let me go into the collections, do my research, take photographs, handle objects. They've always been very respectful about allowing me to do this stuff, and even when short notice. So I find lately they've been making themselves available and going out of the way to be welcoming. I find that to be quite amazing. And so I don't really have a critique or anything to say on how to improve that, because I've been treated quite well.
Ariane.
For myself, after the last 8 months, the only thing that I've noticed from visiting different institutions and collections and galleries and museums is that there needs to be more Indigenous people, not just as a guest curator or as a receptionist or whatever. We need more of our own people who are there to say, like, yes, this can be displayed that way. Yes, that is good for public knowledge, or when it isn't, because there is a lot of different parts that aren't as, it's not that they're not aware, but when they realize that there is the opportunity to ask for help and for input in those types of things, it would be very well, but just with a general of how like there isn't always going to be an Indigenous person there or somebody that identifies as Indigenous. So like when there is, then that opens the door for more reconciliation and better understanding of things. So that's just what I've realized.
Yeah, I think I really appreciate all those answers. It is important to hire more Indigenous people on all aspects. What I would like to see from museums is more programs where maybe we can send out an artist to replicate a piece from that collection, so at least we can take it home, or maybe we get a long-term loan for as long as we can, But I know we're in a fortunate era of museums and Indigenous people. It wasn't too long ago when people would try to see the collection at MOV, at the Museum of Vancouver, and they weren't allowed. They had a very controlling collections curator, and they refused to let anyone into the collections. And they were rude to our people. And there was a time when Ariane and John's auntie, Isabel Rorick, who's our master weaver, couldn't even walk in the front door of a gallery. She had to walk in the back door because she was Native, but they would sell her work. So we're in a incredible place and time where we're being honored, and we're like the feature of this moment. And so this question was thought of just to kind of address that museums are a well-intended post-colonial institution, and as we try to decolonize and look at ways to indigenize, being able to ask you guys these types of questions and in this setting, I think, is so important, and to realize how far we've come. When I worked with MOV, we had over 40 visits of Indigenous artists that had their minds blown every day and were emotional, and our poor museum staff, our collections curator was overwhelmed by the ceremony that emerged just in the collections alone, and I'm glad I was there to hug them after to kind of guide them through this. But moving forward as Indigenous people kind of find our place, you think about 20 years ago and how our people were treated to how we're treated now is a different time altogether, But up until 2013, people didn't know about residential schools. Teachers didn't know. They just saw, these people that were suffering on the res or whatever, right? And so I think, museums being aware of that, that it wasn't that long ago, that our people were treated so horribly by everyone, not just museums or collections curators. My parents got married in 1973, and on their honeymoon, they went to Banff and they went to go get some water, and there was a sign that said, "No Indians or dogs allowed," So I think, as museums forge forward to, showcasing this incredible culture and revealing this sophisticated people, not only just focusing on residential schools, but asking questions like, what did they work so hard? Why did they work so hard to wipe out this culture? And starting to ask heavier questions, like what happened before residential school? So I hope as we kind of unfold this horrific history that museums realize how important they are in this movement. So that's what I have to say on that. So the last question isn't as heavy, and you can choose how you want to answer, obviously, but is what do you hope for the future for shows and for museums and projects like this? Like, what do you want to see happen more of? Hannah.
This is the one I didn't have an answer for.
Oh, that's okay. That's okay. Ariane?
I would like to see further inclusivity of different artists, because not everybody is as prolific, but their work maybe, or even the themes around different exhibits could be more detailed and inclusive of other ways of looking at whatever the theme is. And I feel like it's come a long ways in comparison to like how even when collectors came, their works, whatever they collected, they made sure they knew who the male artist was or what was collected, what was named, the medium. And then when they would purchase something from a female, they would just say bought from woman. So then when you come and look back at it now, like even in my own research, I'm like, well, who was she? Like, how many did she make? When did she make it? How old was she? And it's just like more further details of the different types of artisans that they include.
Beautiful. John?
What was the question?
What do you hope for the future for museums and projects and exhibitions like this?
I haven't thought about it.
I don't know. For me, I hope that we have more and more shows, and you know, institutions do hire more Indigenous people. Far too often, outside of the Haida Museum, I've been the only Indigenous person working on projects, and it's an uphill battle, you know, like without you know, any backup or someone that says, oh yeah, exactly, and helps explain it, it becomes a lot of work. But I'm really pleased with how Sding K'awXangs has emerged from the belly of the museum, and I just hope that we have more. We have way more, and I hope that we're able to include more artists. We have a huge amount of contemporary Indigenous artists to call on that are very sophisticated and very knowledgeable, and so I just hope that we see more and more and more, you know, like Kent Monkman, Hannah Claus, and John Brent Bennett, and Ariane. I want to see you guys everywhere. I want to see you on the buses going by, you know? like I want it to get out there, and I want people to feel things, and I want them to respond. So anyways, thank you for your time. That's the end of our questions, and we have a question period. So we'll take a few questions and then enjoy our collective evenings. So here we go.
Again, this is my introduction to your art, and it will grow. As Montrealers, we're a lot more exposed to the Inuit work, the prints and the drawings and the sculptures from Cape Dorset. From your perspective, how do you perceive of their art versus your art? And anything you want to add?
Inuit art to Haida art?
Haida versus
Well, it's like comparing apples and oranges, but I mean, you know.
Do you like it?
I mean, yeah. I mean, some of their work is quite amazing. I mean, there's Haida art that I don't like either. And it depends on the quality of the work and your knowledge base of it. Like, my knowledge base of Inuit art is fairly minimal. All I can have, the only baseline I have is if I look at it and I like it and can appreciate it. And I'm not familiar with artists or anything like that. So I do like Inuit art and I can appreciate it.
We have an Inuit artist living in Haida. She's from Cape Dorset, I think, or no, she's from Yellowknife, but she's connected to the Cape Dorset people. I myself love Inuit art. I love their printmaking. I have two stories. So Guta Ashuna is Inuit, and she came to do artist residency at the Haida Museum in, I think, 2008, and she loved Haida so much that she ended up staying. So she lives in Sandspit, and we love her. She's an incredible artist, and there is a connection because she carved whalebone, and she wanted to come meet Haida carvers. So I think that there are related elements that we can celebrate between Haida art and the Inuit that are quite beautiful. They also do tattooing. I love Inuit tattooing. Makes me wish I was Inuit sometimes, because then I would have the right to wear that. But they are incredible artists, just as I would say the Haida are too. One story I enjoy about Inuit art, which I'll share, that I think is fascinating to think about, is in 2013 I curated an exhibition called Res Erect Native Erotica. And through this exhibition, it was super fun, but all of these incredible stories emerged, and I really had a strong appreciation for Inuit art after. My mentor, Michael Robinson, had a friend that traveled up to Inuit country, and he stayed with the vicar, I guess, and they had a 2-room house, so there's like a kitchen and then like 2 beds. And the vicar also acted as like the art dealer for the community. But he, I guess, curated out all of the erotic art from the Inuit and kept it underneath his bed. So he felt, I'm gonna hide this, and to them it's like whatever, it's just art. But I guess when the vicar was gone, this guy took it all out and photographed it and brought it back. But so it's interesting to see what you get to see and what you don't get to see, because I think that there's some really spectacular pieces in both. So.
First, I would like to thank you for your presence today. It was a very incredible talk. I was stricken by something you said regarding the kind of périple, kind of expedition you had to all go to find your art, your own community art, and having to go from museum to museum to reach that thing that should be easily available to you. And I was kind of, because my preconceived vision would have been that we need to put more Indigenous art in the museums. And what I've heard today kind of challenges that a little bit. And I'm kind of interested in hearing more about that. To the extent that putting this art in the museums, is it taking it away from the communities to which it belongs to?
I could kind of speak to that, because I was thinking about that future question that I didn't answer. So this kind of ties in, because I think the thing that I'd say about the future and say directions to go is this idea of being artist in residence, which I've had the privilege of being with the McCord for the past since last spring, sort of thing. So the residency is kind of over because I made my work, and that's now the result of the residency. But the possibility of working with collections and the museum in that way was terrific. And it's kind of like you said, with the idea of bringing Indigenous artists in to maybe make something and bring it back. But I think that idea of having more interaction, more relationship between artists, all kinds of artists, any kind of artists, contemporary artisans, contemporary artists, filmmakers, video, whatever, with objects, with museum collections. I think it allows a new perspective on the collections that are there. The objects teach us, and we can hopefully interpret and communicate things with that as well. I know there was this friend of mine who was teaching at OCAD, at Ontario College of Art and Design, did a thing with the Royal Ontario Museum where students all went and had an object from the archive and then researched it and created something with it. Basically, it's this idea of activating the collections. There's, yeah. So in that sense, maybe, collections getting out into the world, but also bringing the world into the collections is a good idea. Yeah.
Well, I don't know. I'm quite glad for all the times that I've been able to go and study at different collections around North America, because like, I don't want to say it was like totally stopped or for whichever reason that people weren't weaving as often, but still having a chance to go and at least see things and get more research and understanding that way. I'm grateful for it, because what if they just totally got rid of it all and then there would be nothing, so.
I know I've studied several Haida collections. Like, I've been fortunate to go to the British Museum twice, Oxford twice, New York, that was exciting. Here, and I worked with the Museum of Vancouver, and I've also worked very closely, as I would call myself, a foot soldier of the repatriation efforts of the Haida, and that's that R word, you know? And for me, it's absolutely frustrating sometimes to see the Haida Museum collection, which is the Haida Museum, and we have no old masks, not a single one. When I started working there in 2007, there was no masks, and I traveled to New York for like 3 days. It was a crazy whirlwind trip because we had to open up a show, and I wish I stayed longer. But when I went into their collection, they had about 30 masks tucked away that I was screaming excited to see, because I thought I'd only see them in books. So it's been a long-term effort for our people to do repatriation. So there's been about 30 years of work that our people have put in, and we've just finished repatriating our ancestral remains from all of the cultural institutions we can see. And June 29th, the Haida Museum is opening an exceptional show that celebrates that 30 years of effort. So we're printing off, I don't even work there. I just act like I work there still. But they're printing off images of all of I think they're doing 2,000 images and putting it in the gallery on 5x7 images. And a number of us, we've had huge delegations that have traveled. We had 21 Haida travel to England for 3 days, 3 weeks, to study the collections there. But so now that we've finished phase 1, we're working for our ancestors to come home and be buried peacefully. Our next step is phase 2, which we're combing the world's collections to bring home some of the best objects. We don't want them all, we don't have room for them all, but we do need that presence in our community. You know, as when we were children, we didn't get to grow up with these things, but it's going to be pretty exciting, you know, 20, 30 years from now, when kids are like, oh yeah, that's the Bentwood box that I grew up with, you know? And we have that. We have people going out and replicating pieces and bringing them home, and it's spectacular. So I think what Hannah said was really on point about building strong relationships to one another so that we can work together to make a brighter future.
Do you feel like there's an openness from museums to give the collections back to the communities?
I think I think there's some tension there, but it's healthy, and there's conversations and relationships. With MOV, they're actually returning a number of things, and so part of that exhibition is just that. But the Haida Museum is not that big. I mean, it's 52,000 square feet shared between 3 different institutions. So, you know, and now private collections, that's another thing to think about, are coming home. So people have all these incredible collections that are slowly being sent home. So I think it's happening, and I think, you know, we don't want everything. We just want a couple of things here and there. And, you know, maybe we replicate it. And that was like one cool thing when we worked with the artists for Haida now, is one of our weavers, Ariane Medley, saw this, and she's like, oh, we could just replicate that and like put it aside, and we have that capacity too. So that's a realm of repatriation. Photography is a realm of repatriation. Building healthy relationships and sharing objects. So people borrow stuff from our museum that travel, to New York or wherever. So I think that as we all grow together, it'll, be a little less uncomfortable and a little more healthy. Anyone else?
Could you talk about the history of the Kwiaahwah Museum and when it was founded and who financed it?
I couldn't tell you who financed it, but it's about a 30-year-old institution, might be a bit older, and it was established, I think, in the late 70s, mid-70s, maybe, and it was run by some curators who really liked the collection, so they kept a lot of it when they left. Yeah, they took human remains, they took objects, and moved to California in the name of science. And the recent director, the director when I was there, Natalie McFarlane, who's French, speaks beautiful French. She worked there for years, and she did incredible work for the museum. And she was one of my mentors, and she still works, on a volunteer basis. But the Haida Museum expanded in 2007. It went from, I think, like 12,000 square feet to 27,000 square feet. And it has an island-wide board. So it's from every community is represented, Haida and non-Haida. So the whole mission statement is to build love and respect for all that Haida is. That's their mission statement. And so it features the science of the area. It holds a huge archaeological collection. The Haida are very good at making agreements with any archaeologist who finds anything. It stays on island and it stays in the Haida Museum. So it's quite a cool, very cutting edge. For a little tiny museum where there's, I think, 50 staff here, there's like 3 or 4 permanent staff there. But it's able to achieve some really big things for like a small place. But if you want to know more, check out the website and they'll kind of give you an idea of their beautiful collection and everything that they have there. The website was just revamped, so it's quite beautiful. So I think we have time for one more question, if there's any, and if not, we can wrap up the evening. We're clear? We're good? All right, well, thank you, everybody. Thank you for coming.